Let's do a mailbag show, answering all of your questions all today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Friday, October 25th, 2024. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a $50 instant bonus when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Welcome in, everybody. Happy Friday. Hopefully we're going to have kind of a fun show as we send you all off into the weekend here. We are doing a mailbag episode, as we have talked about all week this week, and we got a ton of questions. This is our first of many mailbags of the offseason. I don't want to say a lot, but quite a few of them had similar questions or similar, like Bregman's name, I think, was brought up about 15 times. So there's definitely a little bit of overlap. So we're going to answer as many as we possibly can. We're going to try to answer as in a way that just that also answers as many as possible indirectly, maybe as well, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But if we do not get to your question by this episode, by the end of today's show, we will have plenty and plenty and plenty more mailbags throughout the offseason. We might do one every month for the offseason. I'm trying to kind of game plan and make a calendar for the rest of the winter from now until pitchers and catchers reporting in February. But let's start it off here. Let's get right into it. Enough dilly-dallying. Let's jump into some of these questions. We had a lot of questions, and they were all really, really good. We're going to start off with Taco with about 75 O's in Taco. Asks, what do you think is more likely to happen to acquire a third baseman or another starting pitcher, a trade or a free agent signing? I think that to an extent, we don't know what we don't know, in the sense that Scott Harris hasn't been uber aggressive in an offseason yet. So I think that this is kind of, and this will be a reoccurring theme in quite a few questions that I answer on today's show. This is going to be a really telling offseason for Scott Harris. So we're going to get a lot of questions that all of us have and that I still have, in that, people even that are around the organization or in the organization may still have, because I think that this is the first winter where we are really all kind of in agreement where it's like, okay, there's really no excuse not to add some talent this winter. If I had to pick one of those two, I would say that there is probably a bigger likelihood that they are in the trade market, just because they kind of now have some long-term pieces and they can then look at the organization and go, okay, we have depth at this position that we also have, like outfield, for instance, outside of Max Clark and maybe a couple others, but like outside of Clark, really anybody else who's doing really well in the outfield is probably going to be somewhat of a trade chip going forward, because the outfield is like, you have a lot of long-term pieces at the major league level in the outfield, especially if you're a lefty. So I think I would lean trade, but I do expect them to be players in the free agent market. We'll talk much more about that as the episode goes along. From AJ Bunch, we have, what do you think of a possible Green, Meadows, Clark outfield next year? Not happening next year. Clark will not be playing at the major league level next season, but in the future, it gets me giddy. Like I absolutely love the prospect of those three sharing an outfield together. That really feels like an incredible defensive outfield. A lot of lefty. Obviously you have Carpenter too. Like you have a lot of lefties. So, and we'll talk about this later too. We have a couple of questions on some specific players and whatnot and who we need to add this winter. But I think that a righty outfielder is in the cards because of that, because your current outfield is all lefties and your future outfield is more lefties. So it gets me really excited. It's not going to happen next year. I expect it to be more of a 2 or even maybe 3-year thing, depending on Clark's development. From Adam, we have, how do you think Tork and Mize will do next season? That is a fantastic question. So we're doing our player breakdown series that we do after every season ends. It took a little bit longer to get to it this year, thankfully, because the Tigers made a little bit of a playoff run there. But so we will break down much more in depth than I'm about to right now. My opinion of the 2023 season for both of those guys, or the 2024 season rather, for both of those guys, and looking ahead, kind of what I expect from them in 2025. It's tough. It's tough. I think they need to bring in a first baseman to some caliber. Does that mean they need to bring in a star, like starting first baseman, and just completely kick Tork to the side? No, but they need to at least bring in a safety valve option at first base, so that if he hits poorly again, that they're not just, left twiddling their thumbs and have to play Andy Ibanez 150 times next year. So I think in terms of Tork, that's kind of where I stand. I'm not like get rid of him completely. This guy's never going to hit, but I think it's ridiculous to go into next season with him as just like the only option at first. When it comes to Mize, I think that's one where we really have to see how the rest of the winter plays out, and see what the organization's kind of opinion of Casey Mize is. I think that right now, I would plan on him being the 5th starter still, but I also, he's another guy where it really wouldn't shock me if they went out and got 2 or 3 starting pitchers and rolled into opening day next year without him in the rotation. Rough conversation for a couple of former number 1 overall picks. Like I said, we'll go much more in depth on that when we get to their player breakdowns. From Kian, I want to say this guy is the best. He is very always is replying to my tweets on Twitter and always willing to talk ball, and is someone who asks a lot of questions in the YouTube comment section always as well. I appreciate you greatly. So a few questions in this comment here. One, as someone who covers the Red Wings and Tigers, how would you describe Chris Ilitch era of ownership, especially as we figure out whether he will spend or not on the Tigers? He sort of did for the Wings. You can't put him in a box. So I don't think those are comparable at all in my eyes. And that is because one's a salary cap sport and one's not. If my little sister drags me to a garage sale and I look at her and I go, okay, I'll cover you for anything you want at this garage sale because I love you, but I'm not spending more than $20. Have fun as long as it ends up being $20. That's a lot different than me looking at her and going, whatever you want, I'll cover it. Right? Those are two very different conversations. It might still end up being $20 that she spends, but one it's not that black and white in baseball. Like there's the luxury tax and there's a lot of intricacies with, the trickle down effect and expensive teams that are putting money in kind of the smaller market teams' pockets and et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot with the CBA that doesn't make it quite as black and white as the example I just gave. But I think on a broad scale, I don't find them comparable at all, because every hockey team spends the same amount of money. Right. Every hockey team has the same salary cap. Baseball is not the same. You have teams that spend 80 mil and you have teams that spend 300 mil. So I think that it is very fair for fans to be frustrated with the lack of spending in the Chris Ilitch era for the Detroit Tigers. I don't think the Red Wings really matters in that conversation whatsoever. Got a few more questions in that same comment, and then we'll get to all the rest of them. All right, we'll do that right after this. Got to talk to y'all today about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best in the business, and they're the best place to get real money all on sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made a daily fantasy sports accessible to everyone. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. There's so many great offers on Prize Picks as well. I talk about all the time the injury insurance play, right? Where if you have a play and a player gets injured in the first half of a game and doesn't return in the second half, your play stays intact. There's also a lot of celebrities that are in on it. You can go on the community tab and check out all of their plays for the day. Sean O'Malley over in bantamweight. He lost the belt last time out, but still a big name, obviously. Drewski, Joe Budden, you name it. There's a lot of fun stuff going on over at Prize Picks. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in, as always, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back on Monday. Right now, I think we're going to continue our player breakdown series, but we'll see how the weekend goes. If there's any news, obviously, we'll cover that. We also have to do an AFL, Arizona Fall League, breakdown here probably at some point next week. We might wait until the AFL is completely over as well, just to kind of do it all in one foul swoop. But that is the plan going forward. And then when the World Series ends, that's when we really hit the ground running with, free agency and all those kind of big picture conversations. So question number 2 question number 2 from the same user. Before we went in, baseball is not as popular in the previous century with fewer entertainment options and movies culturally, etc. But what do you think the MLB can do to continue growing the fans of the game? May not be able to compete with the NFL in the US, but I have a global appeal like the NBA, NHL. It's nice to share support with people all over the world. Yeah, so I think they're starting to head in the right direction. I think on paper, Mexico is just like such a slam dunk. But unfortunately, they tried the Mexico series, right? And the elevation in Mexico is worse than Colorado. Like those games were like 18-14, and it was just home run after home run after home run. No one's going to want to play there. So I think that is, unfortunately, baseball is a sport where like the climate really does kind of have to be perfect in order to play it at the highest level. I think they should really do a Latin series and just kind of go through, like Puerto Rico, obviously, and Venezuela, right? You can do stuff with Miguel Cabrera if you're the Tigers. Like, I think that's also just kind of a slam dunk and an avenue that they have started doing more of, but I think should become bigger and bigger. Then do more stuff in Asia, man. Japan is huge into baseball. Korea, I still follow the KBO. Like, there's a lot of players that come over from the KBO and have really good seasons over there, and then like leave and come back to MLB or just go straight to, right? So like that's obviously, again, the MPB in Japan. Like there's a lot of good baseball being played over there, and they've started to kind of trickle into that market a little bit as well. You have Ohtani, you have the biggest star, maybe in the world. Like you should probably do more over on that side of the planet as well. So I think that's kind of an avenue. Again, they've started doing it, but they need to invest a lot more heavily into. Number 3, now it looks like the dark days are over for the Tigers, hopefully. How would you explain to someone who stopped watching during the dark days what happened from 2014 to 2024 and why the team was bad, whether it was a lack of spending, development, just to get fans coming back and get up to speed? Yeah, so I would say there's a really big picture conversation that we can have involved with that, just surrounding Avila. I think Avila, I do not believe Al Avila was a good general manager, but people that defend Avila hear that sentence and immediately go into defense mode. That doesn't mean that he was bad at every single aspect of the job. Like, if you know the Avila family and their impact on the game of baseball, it is large, right? And it goes well beyond just Al and Alex. You're talking about generations and aunts and uncles and cousins. Like you're talking about a long, rich lineage of baseball, whether it's front office work or scouting work like Al did. I think that Al Avila was good at finding talent. I just don't think that he was able to develop any of it. And now that there's a better development system in place, you're seeing a lot of, his picks come to fruition and be really good and whatnot. And that's why there were some bad contracts given out. And there was, not a lot of development happened at all for about a decade. Like, I think that you can, I say all the time, right? Like, you can fail a test and still get questions right. And I think that's kind of the best way to describe that, decade of baseball was just like, it was a lot of trying to grow the farm system and get better, and just a lot of swings and misses when it comes to player development. That looks like hopefully it has been righted now. Okay, let's go to Raditz. Yeah, sure. What's a typical offseason look like for a team / players? And additionally, what are some outlying oddities you might see outside the norm, i.e. a player returning early from this time off or extra practice, etc.? Cheers. Take care, from Eric in Melbourne, Australia. Heck yeah. Getting some Tigers love from the other side of the world. That's awesome. So I think, honestly, each team is different when it comes to like off-season routines. The Tigers look like they are, especially in the Hinch era, they are very hands-on with their players, which makes a lot of sense. AJ likes to be in control and what appears to be as much as possible as far as the day-to-day for the Detroit Tigers organization. I think that, we mentioned it on a show last week. They actually have, or they are having, end of season individual meetings with every single player and addressing what they need to do. So players will go back to their homes, right? Their hometowns, wherever they're from. And they will work with either personal trainers and also, usually it's and not or, keep in contact with Tigers coaches about what they want to get better at and improve on and whatnot. And as far as, getting back early, we saw like a third of the Tigers roster was already in Lakeland when pitchers and catchers were supposed to report last year, right? Or this year in 2024. So you have guys who, that Lakeland facility is open all year round. That's why it's in Florida. It's open permanently for anybody in the Tigers organization that wants to go do work down there. It's open and available for you. So you see a lot of players, pitchers especially, because they want to slowly ramp their arms up, will go, end of January, mid-January, and start doing, workouts. Or if they have an injury, a lot of players rehab down there. That's kind of a year-round thing. So hopefully I answered your question somewhat there. From Scapegoat on YouTube, we have, what does a front office special assistant position look like or entail? Not to look back, especially after this year, but I've kind of been hoping to hear about Miggy contributing his impact on the team and young talent. Thanks for promoting therapy and taking care of mental health. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's obviously something that hits close home to me. As far as the front office special assistant, I'm not going to lie to you. It's not much. It's pretty much a fancy way of saying like, oh, he's still just like a part of the organization. Like I don't know. I don't have the exact answer. Maybe Miguel Cabrera is like a mastermind in the front office that I'm not aware of. So take this with a large grain of salt, because I don't know firsthand. But I don't think it's very much. Like I think it's just so that they can continue. They can both still be a part of each other's lives. Miguel Cabrera can still be a part of the Tigers organization. I don't think he's doing much of anything on a day-to-day basis. I don't even think he was in Detroit for a majority of the season. I have a hard time believing he's doing a ton of heavy workload there, especially in this first season. Maybe it'll get bigger as as he gets further and further from retirement, right? Like Alan Trammell has done a lot. And he's a special assistant, and he does a ton. I think it's just really to each their own. It's whatever the organization asks of you, and I just don't think the organization is asking Miggy for too terribly much yet. From Robo 307, we have, will the Tigers replace hitting coaches? The pitching coaches seem very good, but hitting not so much. I understand timing in the majors, but how many times have I seen a 2-strike count when a fastball down the middle is thrown and they don't even swing, not to mention the skill of a hitting outfield fly and get a runner in, or the ability to bunt? Not good. So for starters, I expect, AJ said in the postseason press conference that he expects the full coaching staff to be back. So it looks like the hitting coaches will be back next year. I think that hitting coach is somewhat of a fall guy position in baseball. It's very quickly turning into a scapegoat position, like you're just hired to get fired. And if the offense does well, then everybody loves you. And the second the offense starts to struggle, everybody just kind of like calls for your head and wants you fired. I understand that to an extent, but at the same time, if you don't have talent on, like, is the White Sox hitting coach the reason they sucked this year? Like, no, not even remotely. He's not even in the top like 40 reasons as to why the White Sox were bad this year, right? So I think that it is, and that's not saying that you can't be like a bad hitting coach either, right? Like if I walked into a dugout and was told I was the hitting coach, I'm not sure it would go over very well. But like I think it's just a very fine line to walk. That's all I'm saying. I don't think it's completely. I don't think if you brought in the best hitting coach ever, that this Tigers offense would just turn into like murderer's row, right? Like I think that there's part of it is just talent. Like that at the end of the day, like you need talent on your roster to be a competent offense and to be a high scoring offense. So I don't disagree with you. I think that the approach is something that you can kind of look at and go, okay, is this a hitting coach thing? But there's also different approaches for different hitters and whatnot, and that changes all the time. I'm somewhat indifferent. Like if they believe that these hitting coaches are doing well, then and they bring them back, then so be it. In the same breath, if they announce tomorrow that our entire hitting coaching staff was canned and they were looking for replacements, I would completely understand that as well. So I don't really have a super strong inkling or feel on kind of which direction would be most beneficial. I think there is something to be said for, 2 years under the same coaching if you believe in the direction it's going to. So we'll see what happens. I expect them to be back, though. And, if that ends up biting them, then we'll talk about that when the time comes as well. Okay, let's keep the ball rolling here. Got a few more to go over. We'll do that in segment 3. Got to talk to you today about our friends over at FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season off with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. As always, hopping right back into the mailbag here so we can get through as many as possible. Ian Sanity says, I know you're getting a lot of free agent questions. And you probably have a whole show plan to talk about it. You are correct. Multiple throughout the winter. I want to make that clear. Do you think do you think the chances are Jack Flaherty dons the Old English D again next year? I know he said he loved playing here. I actually don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility. I am always the last person that is big on, you traded them away and then you'll re-sign him in the winter. I think that that's just something fans convince themselves of to like help cope with a player getting traded. It's like barely happened ever, right? Like Aroldis Chapman, I guess, did it with the Yankees. Like there's a couple of examples, but like every single player who's ever been traded in the history of the world, the fan base just goes, we can just sign him again in the offseason. And like it never happens. So I don't want to like, plant the flag of like Flaherty to Detroit. But I think if there is an exception to my pessimism there, it would probably be this case. The only thing that I think may raise questions is he's still young and he was so good this year. I think he could get like a fat contract. Like I'm talking like ace caliber-ish money. And so I'm not saying he's going to get like Garrett Cole money, but it really wouldn't surprise me if he got, 4 or 5 years of top end of the rotation type of a contract. And I'm not sure the Tigers want to give that kind of money out to a guy that would be second in their rotation. That's all. So we'll see what happens. We will, as you stated, talk about that a lot more as the offseason goes along. Do you think the Tigers, this is from Hank, do you think the Tigers' amazing run in August and September, which is unlikely to be repeatable, will lure the front office to place too much hope on improvement of young players and avoid making moves in the offseason? I worry we'll just see Gio Urshela 2.0 type of moves. I think this is a very real concern for a lot of people, and somewhat myself included. I do think that the front office, when it comes to like Greenberg and Harris and the like, I think that the front office understands that was a magical run that is going to be very difficult to like consistently repeat. And they're not going to repeat it in terms of how they did it. They're going to go get starting pitching this offseason. That being said, I do not have faith that Chris Ilitch is going to understand, maybe is the word. I don't know Chris Ilitch. Maybe he's really smart. I'm not trying to be like disrespectful in any way, but like he's the one that worries me more so in the front office. I think the front office knows what they have. I think Ilitch might be the one that looks around and goes, well, I'm not writing you a ton of cash. We just made the playoffs on this tiny little payroll. Just do that again. So that's kind of where my concern lies more than in, the GM or president of baseball ops side of things. From James, if Bo Bichette is available this offseason, do you think the Tigers would have to give up to obtain him? Would Young get the conversation started? Is that an overpay or an underpay? I understand he only has 1 year left on his contract, but if he bounces back from a couple of down years, they could get a shot at extending him first. I think Bo Bichette is someone that we will absolutely do a full show on, or at least half a show on at some point. I think he's a very real candidate to get traded this winter. I think there's two things with this kind of mock-up that you listed here that I want to point out. One is that the Blue Jays, to maximize their value, if they truly wanted to get the most for Bichette, probably should have traded him at the deadline, right? And that's not to say they won't trade him in the winter, but I think that they are more inclined to just run it back for one more year with Vlad and Bichette and just see if it works. Then they are, and then if like they suck, then they'll trade them at the trade deadline. Then they are to give up before this year starts. Now, I don't think the Blue Jays are going to be anything special unless they go out and have a crazy offseason, which I guess they could. But I think that that's important to remember, that they chose not to move them already once this year. The other one is Jace Young. That's a massive underpay for starters. I understand Bichette had a really rough year and there's only 1 year left, all things that would lower his value. They're not going to, again, they already decided not to trade him once. They're not going to give him up for a cheap price. This guy has proven that he can hit really well. He has proven that he can be an all-star caliber player. And there are a lot of teams that would pay a lot more, right? Market determines value. There's a lot of teams that would pay a lot more than just a Jace Young caliber player to get him. It would cost the Tigers a lot more. I mean, that can be the starting point, I guess, but it's going to cost them probably multiple players that are better than Jace Young on top of that as well. Charles says, Scott Harris mentioned adding free agency and or trades. How would you feel about adding a 2-year contract for Christian Walker to play first, trading Mize and Jace Young for Arenado from St. Louis? Would improve the defense in the corners and provide 2 right-handed bats. I like where your head's at with the right-handed bats thing. you added on there, McGonigal and Briseño taking over the corner infield spots down the road. I like where your head is at rather, with all of that. I think I have serious concerns, and I maybe I'm just totally wrong about this, but I have serious concerns in Arenado going forward. He took a step back this year. The bat speed was not there. He's been dealing with like chronic injury stuff for the better part of 2 years now. I have no doubt that he would be a massive improvement defensively still, but the defensive numbers even took a little bit of a step back and the offense plummeted. He was like a mediocre hitter at best this season, with a couple of spells of being well below that. And he's only going to continue getting older with age. I think that's a contract that I would be very hesitant to add to the Tigers, payroll and roster. But I do appreciate where your head is at with adding righty infielders, because that is something that the Tigers absolutely need to do. From Nick, do you think it reflects poorly on either our management or minor league development that we haven't really had a good rookie come up and hit the ground running and then stay good the rest of the season after that? To add on, are there any minor league players you could see starting and stay hot when they come up, not necessarily just rookies? So for starters, let's talk about the development thing. This is something that I've talked about on this show for a while. I completely agree with you. I think that if you were to oversimplify, and if you're a reoccurring listener, you're going to get tired of me saying this because I've said it a lot over the last 3 years, but if you were to oversimplify the player development, and this is an oversimplification, I'm very much admitting that, into major league pitching development, minor league pitching development, major league hitting development, minor league hitting development. There was a point early on in the Avila regime when the Tigers were 0 for 4 in that department. They had none of those. Now, I feel as though they have 3 of those 4 boxes checked. I feel really good about the pitching development in the minors and the major league level, and I feel a lot better about the hitting development at the minor league level than I have maybe in my lifetime, legitimately. I was born in the late 90s, a child of the Dombrowski era. Prospects weren't really a thing that I worried about until I was an adult. So I think that this is they're trending in the right direction. I do still think that the last kind of hurdle to overcome is major league hitting development. I think that that's still a huge weakness for this organization that they need to continue addressing. And to whoever, I can't remember the name of the person who asked the question earlier about, hitting coaches and whatnot, that maybe kind of ties into that as well. And maybe that is me saying that I would rather them bring in a more proven track record at hitting coach. From Stando, we have, on your positional players review, you never bring up hitting with RISP stats. To me, that was what was missing last year. How do you think the Tigers rank as a team? How did the Tigers rank as a team, and individual players rank themselves? Is it an approach problem, or is it selfishness, etc.? So I think, first off, you can literally just Google baseball RISP stats, like baseball reference RISP stats, and one of the first links that comes up is it's all 30 teams and all of their RISP stats on the year. And then when you click on the team, it actually brings up the individual players for that team and how they did. Like Javi continues to be like a really good one. The reason why I don't bring it up too terribly often, and there are some exceptions, like Andy Ibanez hit really well with RISP, but the reason why I don't bring it up too terribly often is because more times than not all the time, but more times than not, if you're a really good hitter, you're going to hit decently in RISP over a large sample size. And if you're not a very good hitter, you're probably not. Now, that's like very big picture, right? I understand that more like in a vacuum, people get, you get tunnel vision and you want to look at a more micro level. That I understand that there are obviously examples of the opposite of that. Again, I've already talked about Javi. He's been great with RISP. For the last 2 years, he's been pretty much terrible offensively in every other situation. That's an approach thing. His approach changes with RISP. He just wants to put the bat on the ball when there's a runner on third base and try to get a runner in. So like some of it is approach, and there are players that do change their approach. Torkelson has been notably terrible with the bases loaded and with RISP for most of his major league career, right? I think that is probably an approach thing as well. I don't know any of these guys. I'm not going to call any of them selfish by any means. But I think that the team this past year actually did really well, especially in the second half. They did really well. They were like up to, I think, top 10 in baseball in OPS with RISP, and top 15 in batting average. So like you did see some improvements this year. I think it's just a matter of, like, really at the end of the day, the more talent you have, the better you're going to have with RISP. And that's maybe kind of a cop-out or a lame answer, and I'm sorry if it is, but I think if you get better hitters, you're going to score more runs and you're going to hit better with runners in scoring position. Like that's really what it comes down to on a pretty simple level. Next up, from To Seeing is Believing. Why is Andrew Navigado not talked about as a possible shortstop for the Tigers? No one ever mentions him as a prospect while he's led the Mud Hens in every offensive category for 2 years in a row. I love Andrew Navigado. Absolutely love him. I think that he will be in major league camp in spring training, and I don't expect him to like make the team out of camp or anything, but if there is a season for him to get an opportunity, it's probably going to be next year. So we'll see what happens with that. But I agree with you. I think he should have gotten an opportunity already. Even if he struggles, like at least then you know he's just organizational depth and you can move on from it. From Cal Davenport, we have Tigers probably don't want to manage the bullpen like it's playoff baseball for an entire season. I agree. Do you think they will look more to add players in the offseason who have shown versatility in terms of their pitching roles? Old friend Michael Lorenzen comes to mind. Yes, I think that yes and no. I think they'd want true starters because I don't think they want to be in the position they were in the second half of last year as good as it worked. I don't think they want to be in a position where innings are at that much of a premium. I think they want guys that they can rely on for innings throughout the entire season. I also think, though, that when they look at relievers, they want guys that can pitch multiple innings out of the bullpen. The only exception would be if they get a really high strikeout rate, swing and miss rate reliever that can be like your basically de facto closer. That would be the only exception. I think any other reliever they look at, Hinch wants the versatility of being able to go multiple innings with everybody. So I think kind of yes and no, but I think ultimately yes. Next from MSW, a few other letters, 87. I've only recently started to watch baseball again. Last time I watched was in the 80s and 90s when you were just a twinkle in your mother's eye. So I found the many rule changes since then to be interesting. I tend to like the ones it talks about speeding up the game, etc. I'm wondering your take, Scott, on the pitching clock, larger bases, whatever else. Yeah, so the only one I really have a huge problem with is the runner on second rule. I think that's an absolute joke. I understand it, I guess. I understand what they're trying to accomplish. I understand the origin of the rule. I still think it's stupid. If you have a rule that goes away in the postseason, then you even understand that it's not a very good rule. That's kind of where I stand on it. It's like the shootout in hockey. It's I guess you can't play a 7 overtime game on, in especially more so in baseball, I guess, because you're playing every single day. But I really hate the runner on second rule. I always will. The rest of them I'm pretty okay with. I think the pitch clock, while it definitely stings a little bit of the baseball purist within me, I think that they have gotten to a point where it's largely not recognizable. Right? It's not noticeable, rather, right? That was the big thing. People are someone's going to win a playoff game. No one's won or lost a playoff game off of an automatic ball. No one gets called for automatic balls and strikes anymore. It happens once in a blue moon. It's not a common occurrence whatsoever. It has just naturally sped up the game at this point, and I have zero issue with it. Bigger bases means more action on the base paths. Do I think that it somewhat taints all of the stolen bases that we see nowadays, especially that and then the pickoff rule that came with the pitch clock as well? Yeah, I don't think anybody compares to Ricky, right? Ricky was doing it with the old rules and was still stealing 100+ bags a year, 121 season. I think that it's hard to compare eras, but it was always hard to compare eras. And I really don't have too much of an issue with any of them except for the runner on second rule. That's kind of where I stand. I think a challenge system on balls and strikes is coming. As long as it stops at a challenge system, I'm okay. I am a catcher through and through, caught my whole life. I'm a purist in that sense. I will not advocate whatsoever for fully automated balls and strikes. But I'm okay with the challenge system. When that happens, it's not an if. That is happening in the next couple of years. We have from Jeremy on Twitter. Let me pull that one up really quickly. I have heard it said that the acquisition of Pudge Rodriguez was the catalyst to attract big names to the Tigers during the late 2000s. Do you think the Tigers currently have that kind of catalyst on the roster? Do you think they still need one? Yeah, I kind of view two people. It was Pudge and it was Verlander. Verlander was an internal, developed homegrown talent, and Pudge was the external, hey, Pudge just won a World Series and now just signed with a team that lost 119 games. That's wild, right? So I think that he was certainly very important in that. I think that Skubal is kind of comparable to Verlander in that sense, where it's all right, well, they have their ace. So you're going to a team that made the playoffs and has an ace. I think that the Tigers, it's more homegrown. I don't think they have anybody that they went out and signed that everybody's oh, well, they mean business because they handed out big money. But I also think if they just give Skubal or Green a really big extension, that will send the same message. I don't think they necessarily need to send Now, I still want them to go get another talent, but to send that message, I think you can accomplish the same thing with a contract extension here. Okay, last question. Very long show. I apologize, but wanted to get through as many as I possibly could. I still fell short a little bit, but wanted to try to get through as much as I could. From 7-Eleven says, what's your go-to Taco Bell order? Man, I haven't had Taco Bell in maybe a year. I used to be a fiend. I used to eat a lot of Taco Bell and needed to like stop. So, I mean, I was a huge fan of the beefy 5-layer. I don't even know if they still have it anymore. The quesarito, they still have the like beefy quesarito that I could inhale those. Got to go Baja Blast. Man, now I kind of want Taco Bell. Thanks a lot. So yeah, there you go. There's a couple other questions, just like again, like kind of general stuff. A lot of people asking me like, what's your favorite? Like, if you were to sign one player, like who would it be? Or, if there was like, and I got asked again about Bregman about 50 times. Look, we will do full breakdowns on the entire free agency class. I assure you. I don't want to give you like would I want Bregman? Yeah, man. Like I can give a really simple answer. Yes. I would obviously, I would love Alex Bregman on this baseball team, but I want to give those questions really kind of full, undivided, deep breakdown. We can really break in the ins and outs. When I'm going through and answering a bunch of questions, yes, obviously Bregman would be great, or like Max Fried would be great. I got a question about him. Obviously that'd be awesome too. But we're going to look at this free agent class as a whole and do deep dives on it all throughout the offseason. I promise. Okay. So if I didn't get to that and you're frustrated, I promise we will get to it at some point in the winter. I appreciate you all greatly. Thank you for all the questions. Genuinely, I tell the story all the time, but I remember when nobody would leave questions when I would ask for a mailbag, and I had to ask like friends and family to do it. And now I have too many to fit into a half-hour show. So I appreciate you all greatly. You literally make this content. So thank you very much for continuing to tune in. And we'll be back on Monday. All right. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch y'all then, baby. Go Tigers.